At the grand ceremony, the Yeoran family finally sends their youngest concubine to the emperor, completing the last of the 7 families who have contributed to the country. Guests murmur amongst themselves, some calling it ridiculous. One wonders if a child this young should really be sent to serve the emperor, while another counters, saying the Yeoran family's children are always exceptional. Someone else comments that it seems like a waste to send such a precious child to the emperor's side. They glance over at the girl, still kneeling for what feels like an eternity. Finally, the royal eunuchs announce the arrival of the emperor, and the room instantly quiets. The Emperor of Seora, Yehwa Aryun, steps into the room with a commanding presence. She's a woman who demands respect, and it's obvious. As she takes her seat, she raises a hand, signaling for the music and festivities to stop. The room falls silent. Yehwa stands and walks toward the little figure still kneeling in front of her. The air grows heavier as tension rises. All eyes are on the young girl as the emperor approaches. Yehwa stops in front of the child and gestures for her to lift her head. The moment their eyes meet, Yehwa's face shows surprise. A child this young? As a concubine? The emperor asks the girl how old she is, and the answer is simple: she just turned 8. The guests exchange nervous glances, unsure how to process this. 8 years old? That's almost too young for this role. Yehwa stares at the girl for a long moment. It's unusual, but the Yeoran family is known for their remarkable children, so perhaps there's more to this little one than meets the eye. Yehwa stands there, still evaluating, while the room waits with bated breath. A soft buzz of surprise ripples through the guests, but Yehwa remains composed. She continues to observe the girl, her gaze sharp, but she says nothing. Some guests nervously shift, waiting for the emperor's reaction. Yehwa's mind works quickly, processing everything in front of her. The Yeoran family's move to send such a young child might be part of a bigger plan, but what is it? She doesn't believe for a second that this is just a random choice. She takes another slow step forward, her expression unreadable. The little girl, despite her size and youth, holds herself steady. It's as if she already knows the weight of the moment. Yehwa wonders what lies behind those calm eyes. Does the child already know what's expected of her, or is she still figuring it out? She takes a deep breath, considering how to approach this unusual situation. The guests hold their breath, waiting for Yehwa to speak or do something to break the silence. Yehwa looks down at the girl, still contemplating what to do next. She has never encountered a child this young in her court, but nothing about this girl seems like an ordinary child. The emperor knows there's more to her than just her age. Yehwa takes another breath, then steps back, the tension still hanging in the air. She says only one thing, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. This will be interesting. The guests exchange glances, some still unsure of what to make of this development. The room slowly begins to relax, but the curiosity remains thick. The youngest concubine to ever enter Yehwa's court has just arrived, and now, the real test begins. What will she do next? Will she live up to the expectations of the Yeoran family, or will she be just another fleeting face in the emperor's court? Only time will tell. What is certain, however, is that the story of this new concubine has only just begun. The emperor watches, shaking her head in disbelief. The Yeoran family, she mutters under her breath, clearly frustrated. She can't wrap her mind around the fact that they've sent such a young child to be a concubine in her court. The crowd around her is buzzing, and whispers quickly spread through the room. Guests exchange glances, some unsure of what to make of the situation, while others eye the young girl with curiosity and confusion. The little girl, despite all the attention on her, remains kneeling in front of the emperor, doing her best to hold it together. She's small, barely 8 years old, and yet here she is, facing the emperor of Seora. Yehwa, the emperor, studies her with a piercing gaze. Her expression is unreadable as she watches the girl, her mind working. The situation is bizarre, to say the least. Does the Yeoran family have some secret plan behind this? Or is this just a strange test of sorts? After a long silence, Yehwa finally speaks. She tells the girl to go back to her chamber, assuring her she won't be punished or reprimanded, though her tone remains firm. It's a bit of a relief to the girl, who had been bracing herself for something worse. She stands up, her knees a little shaky from the long kneel. The room still holds its breath, as all eyes are on the girl as she tries to make her way out. But as she takes her first step, disaster strikes. The little girl stumbles, losing her balance just as she tries to move. It's a small thing, but enough to make the whole room tense up in an instant. Before she can fall, the Emperor is there in an instant, her hands catching the girl with remarkable speed. The room falls completely silent, no one daring to breathe. Yehwa's grip is firm, steadying the child before she has a chance to hit the ground. For a brief moment, the tension in the air shifts, and the Emperor's expression softens, just slightly. The rare flicker of concern in her eyes doesn't go unnoticed. The other concubines, watching from a distance, exchange quick, surprised glances. Some of them look genuinely shocked, their eyes wide at the unexpected moment of gentleness from Yehwa. A few of the older concubines look almost jealous, as though they're not sure how to interpret the Emperor's actions. Is she being kind? Or is there something else at play here? The room is still, as if waiting for Yehwa to say something. The young girl, still in the Emperor's grip, quickly recovers. She stands up straight and insists she's fine, brushing herself off like the stumble was nothing more than a passing breeze. Her composure is impressive for someone so young, and she doesn't seem embarrassed, which is probably a good thing, considering how the entire court is watching. The Emperor doesn't seem entirely convinced, though. Her brow furrows as she steps back slightly, still eyeing the girl with a bit of concern. She asks if the child needs any help, offering to send a royal physician to check on her. The young girl shakes her head quickly, her hands raising in protest. She says she simply stumbled and doesn't need any attention. Still, Yehwa's eyes don't leave her for a moment, her gaze sharp and calculating. There's something about the girl that catches her attention, something different. Maybe it's her calmness in the face of such attention. Maybe it's the way she insists she's fine even after the stumble. Whatever it is, Yehwa doesn't dismiss her right away. Instead, she watches the girl carefully as she makes her way to the door. The room slowly begins to relax, but the curiosity remains. Everyone is still trying to figure out just what kind of child this is, and what the Yeoran family could be thinking sending her to the Emperor's side. The girl walks with purpose, her steps cautious but composed, and she leaves the room without a second glance. It's as if she's used to being the center of attention, though her age says otherwise. The last thing anyone sees is the quiet determination in her stride, the slight sway of her steps still there but not enough to break her poise. And as she disappears from view, the guests, once again, begin to murmur. They wonder, what comes next for this little one, and what does the Emperor really think of her now? Whatever it is, they know one thing for sure, this is only the beginning of her story. The next morning, the girl wakes up with a stiff body, her muscles sore from sleeping in the hard wooden chair. She mutters quietly to herself, annoyed at how the night went. She barely managed to get any rest, constantly shifting to find a comfortable spot. Her body aches as she stretches, groaning at the discomfort. She looks around the room, still half asleep, and notices that the bed, the one she was supposed to sleep in, is occupied. The maid sent by the Yeoran family is sprawled comfortably across it, not a care in the world. The girl's eyes narrow as she takes in the sight. She can't help but feel frustrated. The memory of last night floods her mind, how the maid had come in, claimed the bed for herself, and told the girl to find somewhere else to sleep. The girl wasn't exactly thrilled, but she didn't say anything. It's not like she could argue about it. She pushes herself out of the chair, her body creaking in protest. She opens the window, letting the bright morning sunlight pour into the room. At first, the light feels overwhelming, almost blinding, but it slowly helps clear her groggy mind. She squints against the sun, standing there for a moment as the warmth starts to spread across the room. It's a little too bright, but it feels nice. The girl takes a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs. It's only when the sun hits her face that she realizes the full weight of her situation. She may have been given the title of concubine, but it doesn't feel like much. She still feels like she's nothing in the eyes of others. It's frustrating, she has so much more to offer, but no one seems to notice. The world around her moves as if she's invisible, and that thought sticks with her as she watches the maid sleep peacefully in the bed. The girl rolls her eyes, feeling a little bit petty, but she can't help it. Must be nice, she thinks, watching the maid take up all the space. She sighs and turns away from the window. The warmth of the sun is nice, but it doesn't erase how small she feels. She knows that she has a lot to prove. She might be here now, but she knows she won't be taken seriously until she shows what she can do. The day ahead stretches out in front of her, uncertain, like a blank page. She can't predict what will happen, but she's determined to face it all head-on. There will be struggles, she's sure of that. But there will also be opportunities, and she's not going to let them slip by. The girl glances over at the maid again, who is still snoozing away without a care in the world. In the kingdom of Seora, a vast continent blessed by the power of dragons, the emperor reigns supreme, surrounded by 7 influential families. These families are responsible for sending concubines to the emperor, a tradition that has lasted for generations. Among them is the Yeoran family, one of the most powerful and prestigious. The Yeoran family is known for their unique ability to control telekinesis, a gift passed down through the generations. At the age of 8, Sanya, the youngest member of the Yeoran family, is sent to the emperor as his concubine. However, things don't go as planned. Sanya struggles to gain the emperor's favor, and after 4 years, she is accused of treason and executed. It's a tragic fate for a young girl who was used as a pawn in a political game. But this story doesn't just focus on Sonya's sad end. The author, having read this story in a dramatic reverse harem novel, suddenly finds herself transported back in time, inhabiting Sonya's body before the events unfold. As soon as the author takes over, she hears the voice of Sonya's father, Yeoran, threatening her with death if she ever returns to the Yeoran family. His words, filled with venom, echo in the back of her mind. "If you ever come back, I'll tear you to pieces and feed you to the pigs," he had said. As Sonya's body comes to life under her control, the author feels the weight of his threat. The 7 families in Seora are all obligated to send concubines to the emperor, but none of the family heads want to risk sending their most valuable children to the palace. Once inside the emperor's world, concubines often fall hopelessly in love with him, becoming nothing more than pawns in his game. The Yeoran family, unwilling to let their most precious children fall victim to the emperor's charm, decides to send Sanya instead. Although Sanya may look like the heir to the family, she doesn't inherit their powerful telekinetic abilities. To her family, she's a disappointment, a failure, and in their eyes, she's the perfect candidate to be sacrificed. Now, with Sonya's body under her control, the author realizes the path ahead is already set. This poor girl, abandoned and despised by her family, is on a tragic path toward a grim fate. But now, with the knowledge of what will happen, the author has a chance to change the outcome. With a second chance to rewrite the story, there's no going back. The future seems uncertain, but one thing is clear, things won't play out the same way this time. With determination in her heart, the author plans to make sure that Sonya's future is not written in the blood of the past. Sanya sits in her palace room, staring at the ceiling with a sigh. She thinks to herself that a quiet life away from all this chaos would be much better. Yesterday's wedding was a disaster, too much attention, too much drama. She never asked for any of this. The other concubines are all desperate for the emperor's attention, so much so that they'll hurt each other over it. It's a constant mess, with everyone trying to be the center of it all. Sanya knows that if she stays on the emperor's good side, the other concubines will get jealous and start plotting against her. So, she comes up with a plan. She'll be the perfect child, eat well, sleep well, and stay out of trouble. If she keeps a low profile, maybe no one will notice her, and she can avoid all the drama. But as she's lost in thought, the maid enters the room, yawning and stretching. Sanya looks at her and asks, just to tease a little, how it feels to sleep in the concubine's bed. The maid, barely awake, doesn't seem impressed. She mutters that Sonya's been bothering her since the morning. Sanya just shrugs it off. She knows the maid's always grumpy, but that's nothing new. She tells the maid to get up and help with her grooming, completely ignoring the maid's grumbling. The maid doesn't argue, though it's clear she'd rather be anywhere else. As Sanya gets ready, she thinks back to the story she read before she took over this life. In the book, after Sanya becomes a concubine, she beats the maid and kicks her out of the room. The other concubines rush to report it to the emperor, expecting him to punish her. But instead of getting angry, the emperor spoils Sanya, leaving the other concubines furious. At first, Sanya thought this would be a good thing. After all, the emperor's favor is a powerful tool. But now, she sees how it all backfires. The other concubines grow more jealous, and Sanya becomes the target of their hatred. What was supposed to be a quiet life has turned into a rivalry-filled nightmare. The constant scheming and jealousy are starting to get to her. Sanya realizes that the drama isn't over, not by a long shot. She can already feel the tension building, knowing that things are only going to get worse. What seemed like the perfect plan to avoid the chaos has only led her deeper into the storm. Sanya stands still as the maid tightens the tie of her robe a little too aggressively. She doesn't seem bothered, though. In fact, she sighs, clearly unimpressed. With a wave of her hand, Sanya tells the maid to leave. The maid freezes for a second, blinking, unsure if she's hearing things correctly. After all, Sanya used to be just a nobody in the Yeoran family, and now she's speaking with a level of authority. It's almost like she's the one in charge. But Sonya's tone leaves no room for misunderstanding. She's not just telling the maid to leave the room, she's telling her to leave the whole palace. The maid's face turns bright red, her frustration bubbling up. She's not about to back down from this. The maid huffs and refuses to leave, making it clear she was sent by Master Giyun, Sonya's father, and that Sanya can't just kick her out like that. Her voice shakes a bit, but she's doing her best to sound firm. Sanya doesn't flinch. She stays calm and stands her ground with a cool, almost bored expression. She looks at the maid with raised eyebrows and asks if she's a spy. The maid blinks in surprise, clearly caught off guard by the question. She stammers, trying to make sense of the suggestion, but doesn't seem to have an answer. She hadn't expected this kind of confrontation. Sanya watches her for a moment, her gaze piercing. The tension in the room grows, the maid unsure whether to push back further or back off. Sanya doesn't break her stare. She knows she's caught the maid off guard, and she enjoys the little victory. The maid looks around the room, as if expecting someone else to intervene, but Sanya is already taking charge. She slowly, almost lazily, crosses her arms and watches the maid squirm. It's clear that she isn't going to get an easy answer out of her. The maid tries to keep her composure, but her hands betray her, nervously fidgeting with her sleeve. She can feel the tension rising, but it's not something she's ready to back down from just yet. Sanya smirks, sensing the maid's hesitation. She knows she's won this small battle. The maid takes a deep breath, attempting to regain her usual attitude, but it's clear that something has shifted. Sanya isn't the timid girl she once was, and the maid knows it. With a final, reluctant sigh, the maid turns and walks toward the door, clearly frustrated. She knows she has to leave, but she's not done fighting yet. Sanya watches her go, still with that cool, unreadable expression on her face. It's a little game, a little test, and Sonya's already proven that she's not the same person she once was. Sanya remains unbothered as she calmly explains that she's now a concubine of the emperor, part of the imperial family. This means the maid, as her servant, should show loyalty to the Yeoran family, not criticize it. The maid, still shaking with anger, insists that's not what she meant, but Sonya's not interested in hearing it. To make her point clear, Sanya casually puts her fingers in her ears, signaling that she's done with the argument. The maid stands there, fuming, but she can't do much when Sonya's not willing to listen. Just then, there's a knock at the door, interrupting the standoff. Both women turn toward the entrance, and in walks Jo Yoon, one of the emperor's male concubines. He enters with a smile that looks more unsettling than friendly. His eyes gleam with amusement as he takes in the scene, clearly enjoying the tension in the room. Sanya doesn't seem at all fazed by the sudden arrival. She gives Jo Yoon a polite but cool nod, as if he's just another person in the room, nothing special. The maid, on the other hand, still bristles with anger, glaring at Jo Yoon but keeping quiet. Jo Yoon steps closer, and the atmosphere thickens. His presence fills the room, and even the maid can't help but notice the way he carries himself. There's a certain air of confidence, or maybe arrogance, about him that makes it hard to ignore. He looks from Sanya to the maid, his smile never wavering, as if he's watching some kind of amusing show. The tension between the three of them is palpable, like a storm about to break. Sanya remains as calm as ever, her face unreadable. She's not bothered by the interruption or the tension Jo-yoon seems to bring with him. In fact, it's almost as if nothing could faze her at this point. Meanwhile, the maid's temper flares even higher. She's trying her best not to snap, but with the way things are going, it's becoming a challenge. Jo-yoon, however, is clearly enjoying the chaos, standing a little too close for comfort, making sure his presence is felt in the room. It's clear that things are only going to get more complicated from here. On her first day as a concubine, Sanya unexpectedly bumps into Jo-yoon, a male concubine with fiery red hair that seems to match both his appearance and bold personality. Jo-yoon is known for speaking his mind and constantly clashing with Mirani, the male concubine from the Yehwa family. He walks with a confident smile, his posture straight, and he introduces himself to Sanya in a way that suggests he's used to being noticed. Sanya bows lightly, introducing herself as well, though she apologizes for not using a surname. As concubines, they abandon their family names once they enter the palace, and only a few of them, like the emperor, can claim the Aryun surname. Sanya briefly wonders what kind of person Jo-yoon is. If she doesn't remember him from the past, he's probably not very important. Jo-yoon seems unaffected by her indifference. He comments that the palace is actually quite small. It's a surprising observation, considering the grandeur of the place, but maybe he's just used to the size. He then goes on to explain that he's here to pay his respects to her, since the emperor had noticed her on the very first day. His tone shifts a bit as he says this, and Sanya catches a flicker of something mischievous in his eyes. He adds that, as her superior, he wants to teach her a lesson. His grin is devilish, making it clear that he's not just offering friendly advice, he's planning something. Sanya feels a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She wonders what kind of lesson he's planning to teach and if it's one she'll end up regretting learning. She knows she has to be careful in this palace. Every word, every interaction seems to carry weight. Jo-yoon, with his boldness and charm, seems like the type who could easily make trouble. Sanya tries to keep her composure, though inside, she's already bracing herself for whatever challenge might come her way. One thing is clear, Jo-yoon's not the type to hold back, and it's likely that today's encounter won't be their last. As he stands there, eyes gleaming with mischief, Sanya knows she'll have to be cautious around him. He's clearly the type to test boundaries, and she's not sure if she's ready to play his game. The palace is already starting to feel smaller with every encounter, and it looks like Sonya's in for quite the ride. Jo-yoon leans in closer, his eyes narrowing as he fixes Sanya with a sly smile. He begins to speak about red flowers, a symbol that Sanya instantly recognizes. She listens carefully, keeping her face neutral, but inside, her mind starts to churn. Jo-yoon continues, explaining that a flower that can't stay red for long will wither and fade, much like a person who can't keep up in the palace. His voice sharpens as he adds that a withered flower will soon be plucked, a thinly veiled threat hanging in the air. Sanya stands still, her eyes unblinking as she takes in his words. Jo-yoon lowers himself to her level, his eyes intense and his smile growing wider, as if he enjoys the effect his words are having. He looks down at her with a sharp, unsettling grin that sends a chill through Sanya. Then, he whispers that the palace is no place for a withered flower, his breath brushing against her ear. Despite the closeness and the tension in the air, Sanya remains calm. Inside, her heart races, but she fights to keep her composure. She imagines herself as an 8-year-old, terrified of Jo-yoon's words, running straight to the emperor for protection. But no, she's not that child anymore. She's not afraid of him. She shakes off that old memory, reminding herself that she's different now. She stands tall, meeting his gaze with a cool confidence. With grace, she bows lightly, acknowledging his words without giving him the satisfaction of seeing fear in her eyes. She calmly responds that she'll take his lessons to heart. Jo-yoon blinks in surprise. He hadn't expected her to remain so composed and unruffled, clearly not intimidated by his threats. His gaze flickers with intrigue, a hint of admiration in his eyes as he takes in her response. He hadn't anticipated this level of calm. In fact, it's almost a challenge. His smile widens, but now there's a new gleam in his eyes, a mix of curiosity and amusement. He's intrigued by how she's handling the pressure, and it's clear that he's calculating his next move. Sonya's reaction has made it clear, she's not an easy target. He smirks to himself, clearly enjoying the game and wondering how far he can push her before she cracks. He takes a step back, though his eyes never leave hers. This encounter has only just begun, and Jo-yoon knows that the next move is his. Sonya, on the other hand, knows she must be ready for whatever he throws at her. The stakes are high, and she's not about to let Jo-yoon's mind games get the better of her. The battle for power in the palace is just heating up, and Sonya is determined to play her part. Sonya watches Jo-yoon closely, her expression unreadable as he shifts his focus from her to the maid standing next to her. His eyes light up, a spark of something mischievous flickering in his gaze. Without missing a beat, he casually asks if she's close to the maid, his voice smooth, as if suggesting an innocent request. The tone of his words, however, shifts slightly, and Sonya can detect a subtle hint of something dangerous beneath the politeness. She remains calm, her instincts immediately on high alert. Sonya bows again, but this time, her mind races. Short on labor? That doesn't add up. Jo-yoon is a concubine of the emperor. There should be no shortage of workers in the palace. The pieces start to fall into place in her mind. Jo-yoon isn't asking for a favor out of necessity, he's trying to steal her maid. The realization hits her like a sudden gust of wind. Her gaze shifts to the maid, who catches her eye and gives her a desperate look. The maid's eyes silently beg her not to agree, her plea clear without a single word. But Sonya remains unaffected. She's seen enough of palace games to know that the only way to win is to play along, even when the stakes are small. As she stands there, weighing her options, Sonya considers the situation. Well, I'm probably better off without her, she thinks. The maid hasn't exactly been the model of loyalty, and maybe this is just the opportunity to cut her loose. Sonya allows herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. This could be fun, she muses, already imagining how she might turn this little power play in her favor. Jo-yoon watches her closely, clearly trying to gauge her reaction. His grin deepens as he sees the wheels turning in Sonya's mind, but he's not prepared for the calm that settles over her. He had expected a different response, maybe a bit more resistance, but what he gets is a quiet, measured confidence that only fuels his interest further. Sonya stands her ground, making no move to immediately respond, but instead silently weighing the situation in her mind. The maid shifts uncomfortably, but Sonya ignores her, choosing instead to focus on the man before her, who clearly enjoys the drama unfolding. The tension hangs in the air for a moment, with the potential for a quiet yet thrilling game of manipulation. In the end, Sonya knows that in the palace, every interaction is a game of power, and she's learned how to play. Whether she keeps the maid or lets Jo-yoon have her is a small part of the larger picture, but she's ready to make her move when the time is right. Sonya turns back to Jo-yoon, her face calm and collected as she agrees to his request. With a nonchalant gesture, she offers the maid to him, suggesting that he take her if he's really short on labor. Jo-yoon's eyes light up, his smile widening as he steps closer. Clearly, he had expected more resistance, but Sonya's response is exactly what he wanted. She's playing along with his little game in a way he hadn't anticipated, and it's clear he finds the situation amusing. Sonya watches Jo-yoon closely as he seems to savor the moment. His grin only grows wider, a silent acknowledgement that he's gotten what he wanted. He looks at the maid with a glimmer of excitement, as though already envisioning how things will unfold in his world. There's a certain satisfaction in his eyes, but Sonya isn't fooled by it. She knows that this is just another small piece of the puzzle. As her attention shifts back to the maid, a small pang of sympathy flickers in her chest. The maid stands there, utterly shocked by the turn of events. Sonya can see the fear in her eyes, the realization that her fate is no longer in her hands. While life in Sonya's palace may have been chaotic and unpredictable, it's nothing compared to what the maid will face under Jo-yoon's watch. The thought gnaws at Sonya, and for a brief moment, she feels guilty, almost wishing she could undo her decision. But there's no turning back now. The maid's fate is sealed, and Sonya knows that she has made her choice. The reality of the situation hits Sanya harder than she expects. She wonders what kind of life the maid will have in Jo Yoon's palace, and if she'll be treated well. She can't help but think of the countless other lives in the palace, all tangled in webs of power and manipulation. Sanya has learned quickly that there are no easy choices here. Every action, every decision has consequences. With a quiet sigh, Sanya turns away from the maid, not giving any indication of regret. There's no time for that now. The decision has been made, and she has to live with it. But as she thinks about the maid's future, Sanya can't shake the thought that she might be next in line to face the same kind of power struggle. It's a reminder of the game they're all playing, a game where no one is safe, and everyone has their price. Sonya's thoughts linger on what life will be like now that the maid is in Jo Yoon's hands. Will things change? Will she start to feel differently about her own role in the palace? It's hard to say, but one thing is certain, Sanya is learning quickly that in this world, everything has a price. Jo Yoon turns to leave, but as he moves, his robe swishes and hits Sonya's nose. She winces, biting back a curse. The sting is sharp, but she doesn't let it show. It's like getting slapped by a fancy curtain, she thinks, rubbing her nose discreetly. At the door, Garam is casually leaning against the doorframe, and Jo Yoon doesn't notice him until he turns to exit. The moment Jo Yoon sees him, his mood shifts completely. His face darkens, and the moment he spots Garam, he focuses all his anger on Sanya. He immediately directs his fury at her, accusing her of making a foolish mistake by inviting another guest when he was already present. He scolds her for her actions, pointing out that her age is no excuse for her poor judgment. His voice is sharp, filled with anger. Sanya, taken off guard by the sudden outburst, does the only thing she can in the moment. She bows and apologizes. But in her mind, she can't help but think, it's funny how you can't say a word to Garam, but shouting at me is completely fine. She suppresses the irritation bubbling up, keeping her face calm and composed, and responds politely. Meanwhile, Garam stands off to the side, clearly enjoying the spectacle. With a slight smirk, he observes Jo Yoon's behavior, commenting dryly on how Jo Yoon doesn't get sarcasm and questioning if there's any limit to his arrogance. He throws in a casual remark about how the courtiers never announced Jo Yoon's arrival, a subtle jab at his lack of respect for the palace's strict protocols. Sanya watches Garam, silently impressed by how direct he is. Why is he so blunt? She wonders. Is this just how he rolls, or is he always this sarcastic? Before she can think too much about it, Jo Yoon's temper flares again. His face reddens with fury, and he turns to Garam, glaring at him for calling him out in front of everyone. His anger seems to boil over as he vows not to let the insult slide. Without saying another word, Jo Yoon storms out, dragging Sonya's ex-maid behind him, clearly ready to make her regret the change in her fate. The tension in the air lingers for a moment, but once Jo Yoon is gone, there's an unusual calm that settles between Garam and Sanya. Sanya looks at Garam, still processing what just happened, and wonders what's next. The whole exchange felt like something straight out of a play, with Jo Yoon playing the over-the-top angry villain and Garam the sarcastic hero who's just too cool to care. She can't help but chuckle quietly inside. Sanya watches as Garam exits the room, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. He'd come to check on things, but now that he'd seen enough, he has no reason to stick around. She quickly bows in apology, but Garam just waves it off with a shake of his head, telling her she doesn't owe him anything. He reminds her to stay out of his sight and walks out of the room without a second glance, leaving Sanya standing there, alone. She stares at the door for a moment, trying to process everything that just happened. She hadn't expected any of it, especially not the dramatic exit. She sighs deeply, feeling a bit of the weight lift from her shoulders. With a tired groan, she collapses onto her bed. Motherfuckers, she mutters under her breath. Despite all the chaos, everything seemed to have worked out, at least for now. The tension in her body slowly melts away, replaced by a much-needed relaxation. The stress that had been building up fades, and soon, sleepiness starts to creep in. Maybe I should take a nap, she thinks, allowing herself to unwind for the first time in what feels like forever. Just as she's about to close her eyes, and finally let the quiet take over, the voices of the courtiers float in from outside. They announce that they'll be preparing her for bed. Startled, she sits up quickly. How did they know I was about to sleep? Were they watching me? Her mind races with all sorts of possibilities. No, it must have been my shadow through those dimmed glass doors, she reassures herself. She clears her throat and responds with a calm, but confused, okay. Despite her words, her mind is still a little frantic, trying to make sense of the situation. The moment Sanya responds, a group of maids floods the room, carrying all sorts of items. They immediately start decorating, draping red laces, red bedspreads, and more red material than Sanya can process. The entire room turns into a sea of red, so much that it feels like she's drowning in it. She squints, feeling the strain in her eyes. Isn't this a bit much with all the red? She thinks, trying to focus on anything else in the room, but the red seems to be everywhere. Looking at the head maid, she hesitates for a moment before asking if it's possible to change the bedding to something a little less eye-popping. The maid, clearly concerned, asks if Sanya is uncomfortable. Not wanting to make a big deal out of it, but still feeling overwhelmed, Sanya responds that the overwhelming red is starting to hurt her eyes. The maid's expression immediately softens, and she quickly apologizes. She explains that the decorations are meant for Sanya and Her Highness's first night together. Sanya blinks, confused. Wait, what? She tries to process this new piece of information, but it doesn't quite make sense. Is she really about to experience her first night as a concubine? At 8 years old? The thought makes her head spin. She had expected to be ignored, left alone in the palace. Never in her wildest dreams did she think she'd be the center of so much attention. But as she thinks back to the original story, she remembers that the Emperor isn't the problem. He's always made it clear he won't touch her, he sees her as a child and cherishes her like one. No, the real issue lies with the other men, the male leads. The ones who are unpredictable, overbearing, and just a little too interested, like Jo Yoon. I need to stay out of their way, Sanya thinks firmly, as she tries to shake off the strange, overwhelming feeling in her chest. Things are already off to an unexpected start, and she's only getting started in this strange new life. All Sanya wants now is some sleep. She lies down on the bed, hoping the rest of the night will be peaceful, at least for a little while. Just as her eyes begin to close and her body starts to relax, a maid calls out from the doorway, announcing that it's time for her to wash up. Sanya groans, the last bit of her peaceful moment slipping away. She sits up reluctantly, already feeling the exhaustion creeping back in. So much for sleep, she thinks with a sigh. She can already tell that any real peace will have to wait a little longer. Meanwhile, the Emperor is deep in thought, sitting in her palace, her mind swirling with emotions. She starts questioning herself. What was wrong with me? She wonders. Why did I overreact like that? She shakes her head, thinking that she shouldn't have been so harsh. After all, Sanya is just a child. The Emperor tells herself that she should have been more moderate in her concern. But despite the Emperor's attempts at reassurance, her thoughts continue to race. Even though Sanya is young, she's still part of the Yeoran family. If Gyun Yeoran sent her, maybe she's here to spy on me, the Emperor considers. What if she's an assassin, or maybe part of a bigger scheme? Who knows? I can't ignore any possibility. She sits still, hands folded tightly, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tries to sort through her doubts. Her mind drifts back to Sanya. Despite her frailty, she refuses any special treatment. Even when she's injured, Sanya rejects any pampering. The Emperor can't help but wonder how someone so thin and weak manages to hold her ground. Is she playing the long game? The Emperor wonders, waiting for the right moment to strike. The thought sends a shiver through her. Maybe she's underestimated the girl. The Emperor shakes her head, trying to clear the confusion clouding her mind. Just as she starts to regain some clarity, a soft knock on the door breaks her concentration. It's the maid who had served Sanya earlier, and the Emperor's thoughts shift again, wondering what new developments are unfolding. The maid enters and bows deeply before the Emperor. She doesn't wait to be addressed, knowing exactly what's expected of her. Your Highness, the preparations for Her Majesty Sonya's first night have been completed, the maid reports, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The Emperor's interest is instantly piqued. She straightens, her curiosity clear on her face. She asks the maid if anything about the situation stands out as unusual. The maid hesitates for a brief second, looking down before responding. Yes, Your Highness. There were faint but persistent scars all over her body. The Emperor freezes for a moment, her mind immediately shifting gears. Scars? She processes the information, her brow furrowing. Scars on such a young person? This isn't something that should be overlooked. Her curiosity is soon replaced by suspicion. What is going on with this girl? She thinks. The Emperor stands up, her mind working quickly, piecing together the information. She feels a sharp need to see things for herself. No more waiting, no more second-guessing. She decides that she must visit the Waseo Palace personally to inspect the situation. She can't afford to just sit back and wonder. She needs answers. The maid steps back, nodding in respectful silence as the Emperor strides past her with purpose. Her footsteps echo through the halls as she moves toward the door, her thoughts spinning. Why is the little concubine so evasive? The Emperor wonders. Why does she keep so many things hidden? A sense of urgency builds within her. Something about Sanya feels off, but the Emperor can't place her finger on it. There's something about the girl that makes her feel uncertain. Why does a seemingly fragile young concubine make someone like her feel this uneasy? The Emperor walks briskly down the halls of the palace, servants bowing as she passes, but she doesn't slow her pace. Her thoughts are consumed with the need to find answers. With each step, her mind races with possibilities. What is Sanya hiding? She wonders. What kind of power does she have to make me feel like this? But all those questions can wait. Right now, the only thing on her mind is finding the truth. The palace's grand halls seem to stretch on endlessly, but the Emperor keeps moving forward, determined to uncover the secrets behind the mysterious concubine. The Emperor and Sanya sit together, dining in the grand palace. The Emperor pours herself a drink, taking a slow sip as her movements are calm and deliberate. Earlier, Sanya had tried to serve the Emperor her drink, but the Emperor had politely refused, telling Sanya not to worry about it. Sanya looks down at her plate, which is filled with an assortment of fruits, mostly late-night snacks rather than a full meal. She frowns slightly, eyeing the odd mix of foods. It's mostly fruit tonight, she thinks, poking at a piece of something bright and speckled. Are those dragon fruits? The strange-looking fruit catches her attention, but it does little to ease her nerves. She picks at her food, but she hasn't eaten much, and the Emperor notices right away. The Emperor's eyes linger on Sonya's plate for a moment, her gaze steady and unreadable, before she asks if Sanya isn't hungry. Sanya feels her pulse quicken. Is she watching me? The question runs through her mind. She hadn't planned on drawing attention to herself, but now she's caught under the Emperor's sharp gaze. Her mind races, trying to figure out what the Emperor's thinking. She can never quite tell with her. The Emperor is known for her warmth at times, but she can also be distant and sharp when she wants to be. It's a fine line to walk, and Sanya has no idea where she stands right now. She wonders if the Emperor sees her as nothing more than an innocent child, or if she suspects something more. The attention makes Sanya uneasy, and her thoughts start to spiral. She recalls the kindness the Emperor has shown her, almost too much kindness at times. Maybe it's just sympathy, Sanya thinks. Maybe she feels guilty for what happened to me, or maybe she has doubts about the Yeoran family. Sanya can't quite figure it out. Her mind keeps circling back to that one question: what does the Emperor really want from her? Is it kindness? Or is there something more at play here? The Emperor's gaze doesn't help calm her nerves, instead, it only deepens her confusion. She wishes she could read her better, but it's not that easy. The Emperor could suspect that Sanya is part of some plot, or maybe she's just unsure of her true intentions. The uncertainty feels like a heavy weight in the air, making it difficult for Sanya to settle into the moment. Trying to focus on her meal, Sanya pushes the thoughts aside for now. But the silence between them feels heavier than it should, making the space between them feel more tense than peaceful. The Emperor's eyes don't leave her entirely, and it's like Sanya can feel the weight of her thoughts, even if she doesn't know exactly what they are. Suddenly, the Emperor lets out a soft sigh, breaking the silence in the room. The sound catches Sanya off guard, and she looks up, surprised. Was she upset? Sanya wonders, trying to figure out the cause of the sigh. The Emperor looks at her, her expression softening just slightly. She apologizes, saying she didn't mean to intimidate Sanya. The change in the Emperor's tone is unexpected. It's much gentler than before, almost as if she had realized she might have been too intense. Sanya is a little confused by the shift, but also feels a bit relieved. It's nice to see a softer side of the Emperor, though it's still a bit hard to read. To lighten the mood, the Emperor picks up a piece of sweet fruit and places it on Sonya's plate. Then another. And another. Sanya watches in surprise as the Emperor keeps adding more fruit, filling her plate with an increasingly large mound of brightly colored treats. The fruit looks delicious, but Sanya can't help but think, how much is she going to make me eat? She stares at the towering pile of fruit in front of her, feeling a bit overwhelmed. It's as if the Emperor is trying to see just how much of it she can handle. The fruit seem to multiply as the Emperor continues, her movement smooth and unhurried. Sanya wonders if the Emperor is doing this out of some form of kindness or simply because she's bored. It's hard to tell with her. Sanya glances down at the plate again, her stomach not exactly thrilled by the sight. How did it get so big? She thinks, trying to hide her nervousness. There's no way she can finish all of this, but she doesn't want to seem rude. Still, a small part of her is tempted to just push the plate away and sneak off. But the Emperor's gaze is still on her, and Sanya knows it's probably best to just go along with it. It's not every day you're treated like this, even if it's a bit excessive. Sanya forces a small smile, trying to hide her uncertainty as she begins picking. Either way, Sanya decides to take it one fruit at a time. But with every new piece the Emperor adds, her plate gets more and more crowded. The Emperor watches her, seemingly pleased with the results of her fruit mission, while Sanya wonders just how long this will go on. The Emperor looks at Sonya's plate and gently reminds her that it's time to eat. What is this, a mountain of fruit? She thinks, feeling a little overwhelmed. How is she supposed to eat all of this? She feels a little trapped. The Emperor had personally served her the food, and there's no way she can refuse it. Guess I don't have a choice, she thinks, taking a deep breath and picking up a piece of fruit. She tries to keep her face neutral, but the sheer amount of food in front of her makes her nervous. As she looks at it, she wonders how anyone could eat this much. She cautiously picks up the first piece, a vibrant red fruit, and takes a small bite. It's sweet, but there's so much more waiting on the plate. Sanya quickly moves on to the next piece, her thoughts racing. She can't remember the last time she was so nervous about eating, but somehow, here she is, trying to figure out how to get through this never-ending pile of fruit. Her eyes land on a small, purple fruit, one she doesn't recognize. What's this? She thinks, intrigued. She picks it up with her chopsticks and takes a bite, hoping it will be just as sweet as the others. But as soon as the fruit hits her tongue, she immediately regrets it. It's bitter, unbearably bitter. Her face scrunches up in reaction, and she tries to swallow it, but the taste lingers. Before she can even process what's happening, she feels a sharp, stinging pain in her mouth. She presses her hand to her lips, but blood starts trickling out of her nose and mouth. Oh no, she thinks, panic starting to set in. The room suddenly feels like it's spinning. The Emperor stands up in alarm, her calm demeanor gone, replaced by concern. She starts shouting for the royal physician, her voice sharp with urgency. Sanya can't speak, her mouth opens, but no sound comes out. Her hands fly to her nose, but the blood keeps coming. This is bad, she thinks, desperately trying to stay calm, but her body feels weak. She knows that if things don't improve quickly, it's only going to get worse. In the back of her mind, she's dreading one particular person showing up, the last person she wants to see right now, Mirani. He's the Emperor's closest confidant, and while he might seem calm and gentle, no one dares to challenge him. If he walks in, there's no telling how things will go. Sonya's heart races as she waits, unsure of what's coming next. Before Sonya can even finish her thought, the door swings open, and there he is, Mirani. As he steps into the room, everything seems to pause. It's not just because he entered so swiftly, but because today he's not wearing his usual blindfold or eye patch. Normally, his accessories are a part of his look, adding to his mysterious aura, but without them, he seems even more imposing. His platinum blonde hair gleams under the light, and he carries himself with such an air of quiet authority that it feels like the room itself acknowledges his presence. There's an intensity in his gaze that commands attention, and even though his expression remains calm, there's a sharpness about him that makes everyone hold their breath. It's said that Mirani could rule the entire palace with just his presence, his words having more weight than any decree. As he steps forward, his eyes scan the room, first landing on the Emperor, then flicking to Sonya, and finally returning to the Emperor. His gaze sharpens as he processes the scene before him. His anger, which had been palpable just moments ago, seems to melt away at the sight of them. His posture straightens, and he walks toward the Emperor with a deliberate, graceful stride. There's a smoothness to his movements, as if every step is calculated, a reminder that he's always in control. As he approaches, his voice is steady and calm, asking if the Emperor is okay. Despite the situation, Mirani's presence seems to bring a strange sense of order to the chaos. The Emperor, clearly rattled by the scene, waves him off dismissively. She tells him she's fine, but her eyes flick to Sonya, and there's a clear undercurrent of concern in her gaze. The Emperor gestures toward Sonya, offering a half-hearted explanation of what's happened, but there's no mistaking the tension in the air. Sonya, still struggling to stay composed, feels the weight of the moment. She's not sure what to make of Mirani yet, but there's no denying the shift in the room the moment he arrived. Mirani nods, acknowledging the Emperor's words, but his gaze doesn't leave Sonya. He opens his mouth to speak, but before he can get anything out, a maid bursts into the room, holding Mirani's dropped eye patch. Everyone freezes for a second, and there's this brief, almost awkward silence as the maid hurries forward, offering the eye patch like it's some sacred artifact. Mirani just looks at her, then at the eye patch, and takes it from her hand with a smooth, practiced motion. He doesn't miss a beat, seamlessly slipping the eye patch back into place without even slightly altering his calm stride. The Emperor watches him, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. It's clear she's entertained, finding his lack of fluster amusing. Mirani's cool demeanor is never shaken, even in moments like this, where most people might feel a bit awkward. He's completely unfazed by the interruption, almost like it's part of the plan. With the eye patch back in place, his face remains as unreadable as before, but his eyes, those sharp, piercing eyes, look even more intense now. His presence fills the room, and there's something about the way he handles the situation that settles the tension in the air. While the situation with Sonya still feels heavy, Mirani's calmness is strangely reassuring. It's as if his very presence has the power to bring order to chaos, making everything feel just a little more manageable. The maid stands off to the side, looking like she's waiting for the other shoe to drop. She's clearly unsure if she's in trouble for interrupting, but Mirani doesn't seem bothered at all. He doesn't even look at her twice as he turns back to the Emperor. There's this quiet, unspoken understanding that passes between them, like they don't need to say anything to know what's going on. It's a moment of calm in the midst of everything, and it's almost like Mirani's presence alone has the power to turn the room's mood entirely around. Sonya bows lightly, feeling embarrassed and a little nervous. She mutters an apology, thinking that's the polite thing to do, but Mirani, as usual, seems completely unfazed. In fact, he pats her on the head gently, and for some reason, that's even more unsettling. It's the kind of gesture that makes Sonya wonder if he's either a saint or a master manipulator. But right now, she's too shocked to decide which one it is. His cool, detached demeanor makes it hard to figure out what he's really thinking. He tells her it's fine, that she must have been surprised by the whole thing. Sonya stands there, still processing everything, when suddenly, a wave of panic hits her. Her mind races, and she wonders if Mirani will just unleash his gold dragon on her for no reason. But nothing happens. Mirani just looks at her with those unblinking, piercing eyes, like he's waiting for her to say something. Mirani shifts his focus away from her, and after a moment, he seems to make a decision. Since Sanya doesn't seem to be in pain anymore, he assumes she just ate something bitter. Sanya is still stuck in her thoughts, frozen in place, feeling like she's just narrowly avoided something horrible. It's like she dodged a bullet, but now she's left standing there in shock, unsure of what to do next. The Emperor, sensing the silence, speaks up, asking if it was the fruit that caused the problem. Mirani explains that the strange, grape-like fruit isn't exactly suitable for children. Sanya doesn't say anything. She's still processing the weirdness of the moment and isn't sure if she should speak up or stay quiet. In the back of her mind, though, she can't help but feel a small sense of relief. At least she didn't end up in a life-or-death situation, though the whole ordeal is far from over. She's just trying to figure out if she's truly out of the woods or if something else is about to happen. As the conversation continues, Sonya's thoughts start to race. Mirani Aryun, known as Gwibi, is a manipulative male lead. What a pity that's the only thing he said with his perfect, beautiful face when I died in the original story. Her thoughts spiral, and she recalls how terrifying Mirani truly is. The dragon that gave the Jo Yoon family their powerful healing abilities is none other than Mirani himself. This secret is known only to a select few, the Emperor, Mirani's closest aides, and the head of the Jo Yoon family. That's why Mirani hides his red eyes behind the eye patch. Sanya feels a shiver run down her spine. She's had a close encounter with the truth, and the thought of it makes her uneasy. But there's something worse. Now that they've locked eyes, she's certain that it changes everything. The question is, what should she do now? She never imagined things would go this far. She's starting to realize how much control Mirani has over the palace, the Emperor, and everything around him. And even though he appears to be the epitome of calm, there's an unsettling power that emanates from him. It's not just his eyes or his presence, it's the air around him. It's as if he's always a few steps ahead, playing a game that no one else can see. The Emperor asks Sanya if she wants to eat something else, snapping her out of her thoughts. Sanya quickly apologizes, saying it's getting late. The Emperor acknowledges this and signals to the maid to clean up the table. Sanya feels an overwhelming wave of exhaustion wash over her. She thinks to herself, I'm so tired. I think I'm going to collapse. It's not even that dark yet, but my eyes feel so stiff. I want to sleep. When will Mirani leave? Did I really just think about kicking out the one person I'm most afraid of? She realizes how groggy she's becoming. Mirani notices her drowsiness and, without warning, scoops her up into his arms, preventing her from falling as she starts to doze off while standing. Sonya's eyes widen in shock. Wait. I'm in his arms? She thinks, her heart racing. Wow, this is high. Don't tell me he's going to drop me by mistake. She tries to stay calm, but her exhaustion is overtaking her. Mirani, as calm as ever, notices her state and smiles. He gently places her on the bed, making sure she's comfortable. Then, he begins to take off her shoes as if it's the most natural thing in the world. Sanya stares at the two of them, dumbfounded. What is going on here? Why is Mirani acting like this? She wonders. Is he pretending to be close to me? Are they both completely out of their minds? The affectionate way they're treating her only adds to her confusion. She blinks a few times, unsure of what to do, before finally speaking up. She thanks them both, though her voice sounds a little groggy, and insists that she can manage from here on her own. Mirani and the Emperor exchange a brief glance, one that doesn't need words to understand. They both step back, allowing her to handle the situation. Mirani prepares to leave, and with a polite bow, wishes her a peaceful night. The Emperor, not missing a beat, also tells him he should get some rest. As Mirani and the maid leave the room, Sanya and the Emperor is left alone. Mirani walks away from Waseo Palace, deep in thought. He wonders what he's done. All he did was hold her in his arms out of respect, but then he took off another concubine's shoes with his own hands. That's got to be a strange thing to do, right? Her feet were small, ridiculously small. The silk shoe was tight, and he wonders if it hurt. She didn't seem to mind, but he could have sworn it looked uncomfortable. He can't help but think about how odd everything was. When their eyes met, she froze, like she'd seen something terrifying. But after a while, she seemed to relax, almost like she was trying to avoid him. At least she wasn't crying, but why did she get so comfortable so quickly? Maybe she's just a kid, he thinks, but still, something about her doesn't add up. He doesn't have the answers, and as he leaves, he wonders if he'll ever understand. Meanwhile, back in Waseo Palace, Sanya is lying in bed, tossing and turning. She can't fall asleep, no matter how much she tries. The only thing running through her mind is how ridiculous it feels to lie next to the Emperor like this. She can't imagine being so close to him, especially with her legs accidentally touching his. The thought of it makes her uncomfortable. She's not sure how to handle it, so she tries her best to fall asleep, hoping the night will just end. But then, she feels the Emperor shift. He sits up, and she quickly pretends to be asleep, not wanting him to notice that she's awake. To her surprise, the Emperor's hand gently pats her head. It feels almost affectionate, like he's saying, "Poor thing." But inside, Sanya feels a knot tighten in her chest. She knows what that kind of sympathy means. It's the same thing that saved the original Sanya in the story, and it's also the thing that got her killed. Sympathy is both a gift and a curse. She doesn't want his pity. She can't afford to rely on it. She tells herself that she will survive on her own. She doesn't need. Drop a comment if you want to see a part 2. See you next time.